Chase, you're outdated. This company doesn't need old school dead weight.
Come on, man. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. Give me your badge.
You have 15 minutes before everything fails.
Landon Pierce looked at me the way a man looks at a smoke alarm right before it screams. The HR conference room was too bright, too clean, and far too calm for what he was about to do. He folded his hands, cleared his throat, and said the sentence that split the air in half. Chase. We're moving in a more agile direction. For a moment, I just sat there, 51 years old, 20 years keeping Orion Techworks' digital spine alive, feeling absolutely nothing. No anger, no shock, just a strange, heavy stillness, like someone had hit mute on the entire world. Then I placed my ID badge on the table. Slowly, quietly, right beside the severance folder they hadn't even opened yet. You've got 15 minutes before this building comes apart, I said. Landon blinked at me, 28, newly minted Chief Innovation Officer, fresh off a mindfulness retreat in Arizona where he apparently achieved enlightenment and a marriage to the CEO's daughter. His Patagonia vest made him look like a man cosplaying leadership. Excuse me, he managed. I leaned back in the chair, keeping my voice calm, almost conversational. Not a threat, just math. Across the room, the HR rep Melissa, I think, shifted uncomfortably. She'd seen enough of these late afternoon terminations to know when someone breaks, but I wasn't breaking. I was done. That was all. Chase, Landon continued, adopting the soft, patronizing tone he used whenever he said something he didn't understand. The industry is changing. We need forward thinkers, a more modern skill set, a faster culture. There it was again. Agile, modern, fast, buzzwords stacked on buzzwords, delivered by a man who once asked me if servers needed gas. I looked at him, at the confidence he hadn't earned, at the future he had no idea he was about to set on fire. Keep the folder, I said. You'll need it. He tried to respond some script he'd practiced in the mirror, but the words didn't land. They hovered in the air. Meaningless. I stood, smoothing my shirt. My hands were steady. Too steady. Landon forced a smile. We appreciate your contributions. Sure, I said. Check back in 15 minutes. He laughed. Melissa laughed because he did. They thought it was a joke. They didn't know I meant every single word. Before I walked out of that room, one thought settled quietly in my chest: how fast everything can change when people ignore the ones holding the foundation together. And if you've ever lived through a moment like that, a moment where the ground shifts under your feet without warning, I'd love to know, where are you watching from right now? Your comments help this community feel a little less alone. And if you want to hear what happens next and support the team bringing these stories to life, don't forget to subscribe. It means more than you know. I stepped out of the HR conference room with the same quiet control I had walked in with. But the moment the glass door shut behind me, something inside me sagged. There was no scene, no raised voice, no confrontation, just the dull, resigned weight of realizing your entire career has been condensed into a branded folder and a half-hearted thank you. When I reached for my wallet to validate my parking, I noticed the small red light on my health insurance badge. Deactivated, instant, clinical. A 20-year career at Orion Techworks erased with the same ease as closing a browser tab. I made my way through the lobby, trying not to hear the hum of conversations that seemed suddenly foreign. I had walked those halls thousands of times, always with purpose. Today, I walked out as if I were being gently pushed by the air itself, stepping outside. The late afternoon sun hit me in a way that felt almost insulting, too warm, too bright for the moment I was having. I reached into my pocket to steady myself, and my fingers brushed against a folded piece of paper. When I pulled it out, I felt the breath catch in my throat. It was the insulin bill for my daughter, Emma. I'd shoved it into my pocket that morning, planning to pay it during lunch. That tiny piece of paper pierced deeper than any termination meeting ever could. It reminded me what this job was supposed to secure, what the years of late nights and silent victories were meant to protect. I stood there for a long moment, letting the sting settle into something quieter, heavier, and calmer, like grief reorganizing itself into dignity. I knew where I needed to go. Harbor and Steel. It wasn't a bar as much as it was a refuge for people who understood the cost of holding things together. Henry Barnes, the owner, was a retired military systems engineer who had seen more failures, mechanical and human, than most executives could imagine. When I pushed open the door, he looked up from polishing a glass. His eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in recognition. "You've got the look," he said. "What look? The one you get when you've been keeping the ship afloat while someone else drills holes in the hull." I let out a tired breath and took my usual seat. The stool felt the same, but I didn't. As Henry poured the first drink, I finally allowed the truth to surface in my mind, the scripts that kept Orion Techworks running vendor sync at 2 a.m., billing reconciliation at 3, failover tests before dawn were mine, not theirs, not shared, not company property. My employment contract from 2010 spelled it out cleanly: anything created independently, outside company time, belonged solely to the creator. They had licensed my work, nothing more. And now, with my employment ended, that license ended too. The thought settled over me like a blanket, not warm, but steadying. I didn't have to lift a finger. I didn't have to sabotage anything. I only had to go home. As Henry set the bourbon in front of me, he asked, "Rough day, rough enough?" I said quietly, and as I lifted the glass, I knew one thing with absolute clarity: tonight would be the first night in 14 years that the scripts didn't run. At 2:47 a.m., my phone buzzed against the wooden bar top like a trapped insect, but I didn't reach for it. Instead, I watched the ice settle in my bourbon and felt that thin, metallic anger humming beneath my ribs, the kind you swallow because showing it would give someone else the satisfaction. The bar was quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator behind Henry's counter. Then another buzz came, sharper this time, and a third followed before the first vibration had even faded. I finally flipped the phone over. The screen was a column of alerts from Orion Techworks: email routing failure, undeliverable messages, internal error codes I knew as well as my own breathing. And the timestamp at the top, 2:47 a.m., hit me like a familiar knock on the door. 2:47 was the exact minute the old routing scripts used to run, back when the company still had the sense to let them. I felt the anger rise again, a slow burn rather than an explosion, because I knew exactly what was happening, and more importantly, I knew exactly what wasn't, at 3:12 a.m. The next alert hit: vendor sync error, the message repeated 5 times as the system attempted to repair itself, failing each time. That was the second thread in the web I had kept alive, a web they never bothered to learn how to maintain. I stared at the notification until the screen dimmed and finally went dark. Henry glanced over, wiping his hands on a towel. "They calling already?" he asked, voice low. I lifted the glass to my lips, letting the burn steady me before answering. "Yeah," I said, "but it's not my job anymore." The words came out calmer than I felt. Saying them didn't give me satisfaction, it gave me clarity, cold and sharp in the quiet room, at 4:23 a.m. The phone buzzed again, billing system frozen. I didn't need to open the alert to know what had happened. That was the minute the billing reconciliation script always ran, the one that kept vendors from drowning in mismatched invoices. Without it, the entire financial backbone would seize up like a rusted gear. I set the phone down gently, almost respectfully, as if acknowledging a truth that had been waiting to surface. The anger inside me didn't flare. It settled. It cooled. Awareness took its place, steady and exact. 4:23 a.m. I thought, the old failover and backup integrity tests, the last safety net. And tonight was the first night in 14 years that they wouldn't run because I wasn't there. I leaned back on the bar stool, letting the quiet fold around me like a blanket I didn't ask for, but suddenly needed. The notifications kept coming, each one a reminder of the invisible work I had carried for years. I didn't feel triumph, only a steady acceptance rising inside me. Systems fail when the people who understand them are pushed aside, and Orion was learning that truth the way. The first ping hit my phone at 6:14 a.m., a sharp vibration against the nightstand that dragged me out of the light, dreamless sleep I hadn't felt in years. Then another, and another. By the time I reached for the phone, the lock screen was a waterfall of notifications: HR, IT operations, procurement, finance, even the CFO. The subject lines blurred into a single message: something is very, very wrong. I sat up slowly, letting the noise happen around me instead of to me. That was the strangest part. My body was calm in a way it had never been when Orion Techworks called before dawn for 14 years. Any alert meant I was the one who had to fix it now. The responsibility slid off me like water off a coat. I padded to the kitchen, started the coffee maker, and let the phone buzz itself sick on the counter. But then another notification appeared, not an email this time, but a text. "Mr. Warren, I'm new on the infrastructure team. Do you have any documentation I can reference?" The wording was polite, apologetic even. I could almost hear the panic behind it. I poured my coffee, leaning on the counter as the messages kept coming. Systems offline, permissions failing, vendor portals unreachable. Every department that once ignored my warnings was now discovering what silence felt like. Then my screen lit up with the twist I knew was coming. But not like this. It was from Landon. "Hope you're doing okay. Quick question, where's the folder with the API configs?" He even added a smiley, while the company was burning from the inside out. I took a sip of my coffee, savoring the calm that wrapped around me like a well-worn jacket. Then I typed the only answer that was true. In the documentation. It took less than a minute for the new guy to reply. "Sir, what documentation?" Of course he asked. Of course he didn't know. Why would anyone know something they had deleted without reading? More messages poured in. HR begging for insight, CFO demanding immediate assistance, someone from the CEO's office asking if I had any visibility into current outages. My phone pulsed like a heartbeat made of panic. But I didn't rush. I didn't pace. I didn't even feel the satisfaction people assume comes after being proven right. I just felt steady, quiet, removed from the chaos swirling through the halls I no longer belonged to. I set the phone down, letting the silence reclaim the room. And that's when the real memory hit me, the one that drew a thin, cold line across my thoughts. The documentation folder Landon was searching for was the same one he personally deleted 5 weeks earlier, all in the name of storage optimization. At exactly 8:00 a.m., the kind of silence that only follows disaster settled over my phone. It wasn't the absence of messages, it was the opposite. My screen was so flooded with alerts that the notifications stopped scrolling entirely. Frozen mid-panic, like even the phone couldn't keep up with Orion Techworks' collapse. Clients on the East Coast had just opened their dashboards, only to find locked portals, missing data, and transactions suspended in midair. Within minutes, the situation snowballed into something no amount of corporate spin could smother. Millions of dollars in vendor payments hung in limbo, suspended like a half-finished bridge. Customer service lines were overwhelmed. Procurement couldn't validate a single invoice. And the billing engine had simply given up. Choking on mismatched entries, it no longer had scripts to reconcile. Every safety net I had built, every automatic check, every silent correction, every invisible patch had vanished the moment I walked out yesterday. And now, the world was noticing. I arrived at Harbor and Steel just as Henry was unlocking the front door. He didn't question the early hour or the expression on my face. He just nodded and went behind the counter. Pulling down a clean glass, I sat at my usual stool, my phone buzzing steadily beside my hand, like a distressed animal desperate to be picked up. But I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. I already knew what the alerts would say. Then, the news alert came, its tone cutting through the chaos like a clean slice of steel. I tapped the banner, and the headline expanded across the screen. Orion Techworks plunges 18% as technical outage spreads. 18%. And that was before the West Coast had even woken up, before the bigger clients had even logged on, before the shareholders had grasped the scope of the morning. Henry placed the bourbon in front of me, the same drink, the same glass, but a very different feeling. I wrapped my fingers around it, lifted it slightly, and let a small, controlled breath escape. 18%, I murmured, tipping the rim toward the TV above the bar. That's just the warm-up. Henry didn't laugh. He just studied me, the way only someone who has watched entire systems fail understands how close this kind of collapse always was. He didn't need the details to know what came next. I took a slow sip, letting the quiet satisfaction settle low in my chest, not gloating, not vindictive, just a calm recognition that reality was finally catching up to the choices they made. I hadn't sabotaged anything. I'd simply stepped away. And without the hands that held those systems together, Everything else did exactly what it was always destined to do, and this was only the first hour. The call from Stratum Digital came just after 9:15 a.m., slipping through the avalanche of Orion alerts still crashing against my phone like waves trying to reclaim a shoreline. I almost didn't answer. I assumed it was another department head begging for a miracle I no longer owed them. But the number was unfamiliar, and the silence in Harbor and Steel had settled into something steady enough that I trusted my instincts again. I slid my thumb across the screen. Mr. Warren. The voice was calm, precise, and carried none of the panic I'd been hearing all morning. This is Mara Ellison, talent director at Stratum Digital. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. A bad time? I almost laughed. Behind me, the news anchor was still dissecting Orion's freefall, and my phone was vibrating like it wanted to launch off the counter, but Mara's tone felt like an open door in a burning building, something cool, measured, untouched by the chaos. I've had worse mornings, I said. She chuckled softly. We've been following your work for a while now, 6 months, to be exact, and today's events confirm everything our team believed about your contributions. I straightened on the stool, suddenly aware of the shift in the air. You've been following my work, yes, quietly. We know what you built at Orion. We also know what they ignored. For the first time all morning, vindication edged into something gentler, a faint warmth behind my ribs. Not triumph, but validation. Someone had actually been watching. Someone understood the difference between buzzwords and backbone. Mara continued. We'd like to offer you a position. Principal Systems Architect. Double your previous salary, equity package, full benefits, and more importantly, a team that respects engineering more than trend chasing. I didn't speak right away. The words landed with surprising weight, not because of the numbers, but because of the recognition behind them. That's generous, I said quietly. It's appropriate, she corrected. Our CTO has a phrase he uses when reviewing candidates. We don't hire people who talk about preventing fires. We hire the people who have been quietly putting them out for years. Some part of me exhaled a long, overdue release, and just to be clear, she added, we're not interested in buzzword architects. We like the people who keep systems from exploding. I smiled. Small and real? That I can do, I know, she replied. Take the weekend to think it over. But Chase, we've saved this spot for you. I ended the call and set the phone down gently. Hope not loud, not bright, but steady settled in beside me like an old friend returning home. What I didn't know was that this offer wasn't the ending of Orion's downfall. It was only the overture to the reckoning still to come. The lawsuit started quietly, just a headline tucked beneath Orion Techworks' plunging stock chart the next morning. By noon, it wasn't quiet anymore. 3 major vendors filed claims within hours of each other, alleging service failures, breached contracts, and financial losses that ran well into the millions. By the end of the week, it grew to 5. And then came the notification everyone in the industry fears a class action suit representing dozens of smaller partners, each one echoing the same accusation. Orion had ignored warnings, concealed vulnerabilities, and allowed its infrastructure to rot beneath a glossy coat of buzzwords. Watching it unfold from my kitchen table, coffee cooling beside me, I felt a strange weight settle in my chest, not guilt because I hadn't broken anything, but something older, heavier. The moral weight of knowing exactly how preventable this was. I'd seen the cracks forming years ago, logged them, documented them, repeated the alerts until my fingers hurt, and every time, leadership had smiled, nodded, and moved on to the next innovation initiative. 2 days later, the SEC made its move. The headline flashed on my phone with the cold precision of a scalpel. SEC opens probe into Orion Techworks for failure to disclose technical risks. I read it twice, maybe 3 times. The investigation wasn't a surprise. Anyone with a functioning modem could see the collapse coming. But seeing those 3 letters, SEC, attached to the company I had once carried on my back for 2 decades, stirred something sharper than vindication. It was justice beginning to stretch its limbs. That same afternoon, a thick envelope arrived in my mailbox. The return address alone made my stomach tighten. U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, Division of Enforcement. I stood on my porch for a moment before opening it, letting the cool air ground me. Inside, neatly typed and highlighted in places, was the line that froze me in place, Mr. Warren. You are requested to provide technical testimony relevant to the investigation. Not accused, not implicated, requested. They didn't want to investigate me. They wanted my expertise. I carried the envelope inside and laid it on the kitchen table next to my old laptop, the one holding 14 years of warnings, log files, recovery notes, risk assessments, and disregard from management. Nothing had been deleted, nothing had been lost. I had always kept copies. I'd always known this day might come. As I sorted through the folders, one truth sharpened into something cold and pointed, buried among the hundreds of warnings, performance reports, and system analysis were emails from Landon himself, dismissive replies, shortcuts he'd insisted on, and more than one message that ended with the phrase, "This won't be an issue." Some of those emails he would soon wish had never been sent. The conference room chosen for my deposition looked more like a war bunker than a place for conversation. A camera sat on a tripod pointed directly at the chair reserved for me. 3 attorneys in tailored suits arranged their notes into neat, threatening stacks, and beside them, towering like a monument to corporate failure, was a column of printed documents, emails, logs, warnings, and reports I had written over 14 years at Orion Techworks. I took my seat, feeling the familiar heat of anger flicker somewhere deep but contained, suppressed. It wasn't the kind that made your hands shake. It was the kind that sharpened your focus. The lead attorney, Sarah Mitchell, offered a polite smile. "Mr. Warren, thank you for being here." I nodded once. "Let's begin." The questioning started with routine details: my position, my responsibilities, the systems I maintained. Then Sarah guided me into the territory she was really after. "Can you describe an example of a critical incident you prevented?" I didn't need to think. September 2021. A corrupted vendor feed tried to overwrite thousands of purchase orders. I intercepted it at 2:30 a.m., rebuilt the index manually, and restored the backups before dawn. No one outside the infrastructure team ever knew. She scribbled something down. Another March 2020, a cascading API failure would have taken down the entire billing chain. I isolated it before finance even logged in. Every answer dropped like a stone into the silence. A record of all the fires I had extinguished while management told the world everything was fine. Then, Sarah lifted a new document, this one printed in full color. "Mr. Warren, I want to show you an internal Slack message from Orion senior leadership." I already knew whose name would be on it. I just didn't know which version of his arrogance I was about to hear. She read it aloud. "Chase is old school dead weight. I'm going to clean up his legacy. Message from Landon Pierce, CIO." For a moment, I felt the old anger flare, sharp, unfair, deeply human, but it passed like a held breath released. I looked straight at the camera, recording every blink, every tone, every word. "My legacy," I said calmly, "was the only thing keeping their systems alive." Sarah waited. "And did you sabotage Orion Techworks in any way after your termination?" I leaned forward slightly. "I didn't break anything," I said, voice steady as a scalpel. "I just stopped fixing what was already broken." The room went completely still. Even the court reporter paused for half a second before typing again. Sarah closed her folder. No further questions. But my final line meant only as a simple truth was already on its way out of that room. By morning, it would become the headline seen by every investor in the country. Orion Techworks didn't implode in a dramatic explosion. It crumbled the way rotten structures always do, piece by piece, until one day the whole frame simply couldn't hold its own weight anymore. When the SEC investigation wrapped and the lawsuit settled, the numbers spoke louder than any apology ever could. $22 million in penalties, settlements, and emergency remediation. The board released a sterile 3-sentence statement: no admission, no accountability. Just a polite acknowledgement that operational misalignments had occurred. A week later, the CEO retired without ceremony. No video tribute, no final town hall. He simply disappeared from the company website one morning, replaced by a blank silhouette and the words, "Interim leadership forthcoming." It was the quietest exit I'd ever seen fitting. In its own way, silence can be its own kind of verdict. Landon's fall, however, was far less graceful. He was removed from the leadership page first, then scrubbed from the internal Slack workspaces, and finally escorted out of the building, according to the half-dozen employees who emailed me anonymously carrying the same branded box they once handed to me. His LinkedIn updated 2 days later: independent consultant, available for opportunities. A corporate obituary, written in real time. Then came the part I wasn't expecting. Landon posted a long, trembling essay on LinkedIn, an apology disguised as a reflection. He talked about leadership lessons, about humility, about the importance of valuing institutional knowledge. He even wrote a line about honoring those who came before you. I read the entire thing twice, not because I believed him, but because the comments were already piling up like dry leaves catching fire. The top one was brutal in its simplicity. "Bro, didn't you fire the guy with all the institutional knowledge below that?" Someone attached screenshots, real ones, from internal emails where Landon dismissed risk reports, mocked compliance protocols, and insisted on deleting the documentation folder to optimize storage. Another former employee chimed in with timestamps showing exactly when the automation scripts stopped. Then another posted Slack logs from the week he bragged about cleaning up Chase's outdated thinking. The post didn't survive the day. Landon deleted it sometime around midnight, but it didn't matter. Screenshots are forever, and the internet never forgets. I didn't comment. I didn't like. I didn't share. I simply closed the app and set my phone face down on the table. For the first time in years, there was no tension behind my ribs, no anger simmering under my skin, just a clean, quiet release. Orion Techworks was done. Landon was finished. Justice, slow, poetic, inevitable, had completed its arc. And me, I was somewhere else entirely. I didn't realize how much noise I had carried inside me until Stratum Digital showed me what real quiet felt like. Not the brittle silence of Orion Techworks where every peaceful minute meant a catastrophe brewing, but a calm built from competence. Systems worked, people listened, leadership actually understood infrastructure, and for the first time in years. I wasn't bracing for alarms that never stopped ringing. My days found a new rhythm. I would walk into the office, grab a coffee, review clean dashboards that didn't scream for rescue, and meet with people who valued answers more than buzzwords. They didn't want someone agile. They wanted someone who knew how not to let a company burn down, and they treated me like that person. Every question was genuine, every meeting purposeful, every decision anchored in reality, not slides stolen from a leadership seminar. Warm pride settled slowly, precise, quiet, earned. I wasn't fixing disasters anymore. I was building foundations that wouldn't need saving. The relief alone felt like a second paycheck. And at home, life softened in ways I didn't know I had missed. One evening, my daughter Emma stood at the kitchen counter stirring pasta sauce while sunlight spilled across the floor like something out of a life I used to watch from far away. I chopped garlic beside her, listening to the fridge hum, an ordinary sound I hadn't heard in years because Orion had conditioned me to listen only for emergencies. "You seem lighter," she said, glancing over. "I think I finally am." I replied. We sat for dinner with the sliding door open, letting the breeze in. My phone rested on the table, screen down, silent. Not silent because I muted it, silent because no one needed me to put out a fire that only I could see. The world had finally learned to stand without leaning on me after Emma went to bed. I stepped onto the back porch, a bourbon in hand. The night cool around me. I reflected on everything Orion had lost: $22 million, their CEO, their credibility, and the myth that systems magically take care of themselves. All I had lost was 20 minutes. 20 minutes of a termination meeting that freed me from a place that never deserved the years I gave it. That realization felt like the final click of a lock opening. Revenge wasn't Orion collapsing. Revenge was the moment I stopped caring that it did. I exhaled, slow and steady, and set my phone aside. That wasn't revenge. I said to the quiet night, that was just math. If you've ever walked away from a place that didn't value you, I'd love to know where you're watching from. And if this story resonated with you, feel free to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep creating stories that remind people of their worth.